persona. That's the generic CDMP route or roadmap that one can take as an individual. Looking at the associate badge for sort of the EIM manager persona and data citizen persona, and the practitioner and master for the professional. That's on the individual side. And then we have customized corporate training, where we look at customizing case study training with the outcomes of community of practice, evidence of work, and building applications. And there we focus on the also different personas, the executive, the IM manager, the data citizens. There's some work there that we're doing in terms of providing how to be a citizen effectively, providing workbooks. And then obviously for the professionals within that, in those communities there, how to govern, how to plan, that's architecture, how to model, how to trust, it's data quality. And then brand new one that's coming very soon is how to MDM. And it's an outcome of this series, thanks to Paul again. So he's working day and night helping get that course sorted out. So, and he's probably looking forward to ordering me around to do a whole lot of slides for him. So awesome stuff there. And then, of course, the establishment of community of practice. That's just a channel or an area that we're also focusing on, where we're providing advisory services, which is mentoring and coaching of those leaders. We're looking at doing assessments by persona, helping the individuals and the team build their CV, assisting with practice definitions, principles, policies, and procedures, growing the knowledge management systems and knowledge base, and then obviously the maturity assessments in terms of that community of practice, and then the ongoing services there. So just a quick shout out to those there. And then how to get hold of us. We have Modelware systems. I'll drop all of this into the chat just now. Their website, please visit our website. Also, you can email me at sales@modelware.com. I'll be glad to set up some time with you to discuss the learning roadmaps for you. And then, of course, the LinkedIn. And you know those well because you're on the forum right now. But if you haven't seen all the opportunities in terms of webinars and discussion groups, meetups, etc., I'll drop it on the chats as well. So without further ado, thanks again to Howard and Paul, and over to you, Paul.
All right, thanks everyone. I will take over screen sharing. All right, thanks for the introduction, really appreciate it. So this is the fourth and final webinar in this series, and then I'm sure Howard will find something new to throw my way, but at least then
we've got plenty for you, Paul.
Yes. So yes, so today's focus is on the executives. All right, you've done that for us, Paul. All right, so today we are going to start with something different. You guys need to please go here. All right, so scan that QR code. We're going to do a quick game. So point your phone to that. Sure, if you've got a newish phone, normal picture will do. It'll open a web page.
Or Paul as well, they could, if they don't have the phone, they can go to www.menti.com and enter that code, that 11206993.
Yes. All right, so it's going to be a bit difficult for me to do both, but I'm going to try my best. The next few slides, it might be a bit small on your screen, apologies for that, but it's just to make sure that the game works. So I'll be just stepping through the slides on my right-hand side here, and I'll go back into presentation mode after the game. I see there's 4 users that has logged on. We are, I don't know, about 20 people or so. So I'm just waiting for a few more. 8. Okay, fine.
I see the Time magazine on my iPhone now. Do I need to do something further to, or do you see?
Yeah, there's just a like.
Yeah,
mark.
I did that.
Okay, great. We're on 12, 13. Awesome. It's a fun game, so come play along.
More.
there's the gamer talking.
Yeah. All right, cool. I think we've got 15, which is fantastic. Okay, cool. So the game works like this. I'm going to ask you a few questions about a famous man called Dr. Christian Barnard. For any international speakers, attendees, I don't know if you've heard of him. He is famous in South Africa, and in the world as well. And we'll see how well you know him and for what purposes. Okay, so your first question is, was Dr. Barnard the first man to think that heart transplants were possible?
Just get ready. Oh,
There we go.
There we go.
Okay. Was Dr. Barnard the first man to think that heart transplant was possible? What is the answer? Have you answered?
I have.
Okay. All right. No. Okay, great. The answer was no. You're quite correct. He was not the first man who thought it was possible. Make a little bit of a slip up. So if you were awake, you would have noticed. That honor belonged to a guy called Simon Flixner. He was a US medical researcher, and he wrote a paper in 1907 working for the University of Chicago, tendencies in pathology. And he was the guy who's been credited the idea that it's possible. Okay, next question. Let's see if this works. Okay, we've got a leaderboard. Okay, so Kai Sayak, I'm sure I'm butchering your name. I do apologize. Debs, you're doing well. Fantastic. Not Nick. Okay, it's funny. All right, next question. Okay, ready? The faster you answer, the more points you'll get. Was Dr. Barnard known as the father of heart transplants? Time's almost up. Okay, you guys who said yes, unfortunately you were somewhat wrong. He is not known as a father of heart transplants.
Somewhat, not completely, just somewhat wrong.
Some of us know him as the father of heart transplants.
Okay,
yes.
I'll explain now what that answer was. Let's just see how the leaderboard looks like. So while that comes up, okay, so the guy who's known as the father of heart transplants is a guy called Norman Shumway. But this Norman Shumway on Gondorf, this Norman Shumway on the screen you see here, he couldn't have been the guy who's known as father of heart transplants because he was a Republican politician in the 1970s. However, Norman Shumway, so this one was with a D, Norman Shumway, this guy, he was one of the pioneers of heart surgery, Stanford University in the 1960s. He is credited with that title. He had a lot of writing and academic output on the topic. So he is the guy who's known as the father of heart transplants. Magical Rhino. Oh, I love these names. Debs, you're dropping there, and there's no Googling. Okay, you can't Google these things. All right?
Fine.
Stingalicious. Wow, that sounds cool. All right, next question. Okay, let's try again. All right. Answer the faster to get more points. Was Dr. Barnard the first pediatric heart transplant surgeon on December 6, 1967? December 6 is my birthday. I don't expect any presents.
But you
Time's
were
almost
before
out.
1967, right?
Yeah, sure. Okay, we've got an even one here. Yes and no, same, almost the same score. We've got one maybe. All right, let's see. He wasn't. Let's just see how the board looks like. Ooh, Veronica is coming in there. Kai Sayak. Hey, Gandalf. You know, Gandalf, you might be quite clever in these games, but spell your name wrong. It's Gandalf with an A. Anyway. All right.
This is not a clever Gandalf.
Okay, so this guy, Adrian Kantrowitz, he was the first pediatric heart transplant surgeon on December 6, 1967. All right, and we'll say something a little bit more about him. Now, I think the final question, let's see if you get this one right. Was Dr. Barnard the first heart transplant surgeon on December 3rd, 1967? Time is almost out. Get your answers in. And there's one no. Can you believe it? Can't believe it. All right.
That was Mark from Calgary.
All right. So interestingly enough, this guy, Adrian Kantrovich, the American, you can see he did his heart transplant. It was a pediatric one, right? And he did it 3 days after Christian Barnard. And I don't know how the news was back then. It was obviously long. So I don't know when he found out that he actually wasn't the first guy. And there's some person from South Africa. I mean, who cares about what happens there? That beat him to the punch. I'm sure he wasn't happy. Gandalf, you are the winner. Congratulations. Take the money and go for spelling lessons. It'll suit you well. All right. Okay, so the game is not quite over yet. Still look at your phone, and I mean, we looked at some typical MDM problems. See if you can answer the question, just last few questions there in terms of the priority.
I need a bigger phone.
Yeah, this i5 is.
Okay, coming in. Mixed up attributes, mistaken identities, similar products or services, in this case, operations. I mean, we dealt with them all, right? So they were all kind of mixed up. And in terms of priority, I'm glad to see mistaken identities coming out top, because although all are important, identity management is, it's been I'm sure that must be Gandalf. Is it you? So all of those are issues, and especially around identity management. That's just a very important thing in MDM. All right, so I'm hoping you enjoyed the game, and the whole idea was that that it's a very practical kind of way to experience what typical MDM issues look like in the real world, right? So we had mixed up attributes, one doctor with another, the shumways were the identity confusion. We talked about a heart transplant that sounded very similar, even very close in the timeline, both historical moments and yet completely separate events. And those are the kind of things that we deal with when we talk about MDM. So I'm hoping that makes it clear. Okay, so just MDM at a glance. I thought for those of you who've been on this call before, yeah, I don't think you've seen this one. So today we were at another meeting, Howard and I, and some of the discussions there remind me that that I used this before, so I thought I'd use it today, just to get a bit of a at a glance view of what MDM is. Now, in here we've got a guy who is paying for some coffee, right? And there's a waiter here on the left. You can't see her face, but her name is Nicole Florentino. Does anybody know who that is? Can you give me a hands up if you do? I would have been very surprised if anybody did. Esty, I think you should probably have known, maybe. And Veronica will find it interesting to know. But she is the bassist for the Smashing Pumpkins. Smashing Pumpkins always have a female bassist. I don't know if you know that. It's a thing for them. Anyway, so we've got a waiter here. It's a person with a name, Nicole Florentino, age 23. We've got a customer here, John Deacon. You guys should know who John Deacon is. He's more well known. I'll give you a hint. He's also a bass player for somebody. Thank you, Esty. You mouthed the answer correctly. So
that's been bad from like a video perspective, you know.
We can see what you eat for lunch.
Yeah.
I
All
hope
right. So
not.
we've got another person. So master data management is about managing master data. Master data is about people, places, and things. So on this picture, we've got a customer, we've got a waiter, and we've got a vendor, and they are all people of sorts or groups of people, or organizations in the case of vendor. So we've got the vendor here, Coco Ula. It's a very nice cafe in Cape Town where I often have coffee. And let's just say, for us, this is a gold status. So something like status, you might argue, is maybe not hardcore MDM or master data or not. Location is included in Cape Town. Location, it's a place. It's also master data, and we're dealing here with a cappuccino, which is the name of the product, with a type of coffee. Okay. Now the master data on this slide would be the actual people themselves, and the roles which they play. So product is also master data, although type would not be. Type would be reference data, right? It refers to a list of sorts that you use to classify your product. So in this case, it's just coffee. And location is just master data as well. The fact that it's paying there means it's an event, it's a transaction, there's something happening, it's a verb. Verbs are not master data, nouns are. Nouns are master data. And the fact that he might be, he's paying by credit card, the fact that he pays by credit card and not cash could be a reference data, data point. The currency here might be important. Is it in rands or in US dollars or in Canadian dollars? That would be reference data as well. And I just thought I'd show you this to when we talk about master data, it's people, places, and things. We'll repeat that a little bit later again. And it's surrounded by other kinds of data like transactional data or reference data. Okay, hoping that's clear. Any questions? Should be straightforward. Okay, so today's focus is on executives. So as we talk about the why today, I have shown this slide before and it's as relevant. I'm borrowing it from TIPCO. They've got a nice way to just summarize it. And the reason why you would enter into master data management projects would be to improve one or all of these things. It's either from compliance reasons, for the optimization of operations reasons, or to improve your analytics. And those are the three main drivers for MDM. And I want to show this as well, just borrowing from Informatica. When you do, this slide refers to not to master data management per se, but you need proper and clean, well looked after, curated master data for things like this to work. If you bring analytics into play or any kind of analysis that you want on your customers, things like sentiment or relationship graph, things like that, if your master data is broken or dirty, nothing will work. Your analysis and your insights would be wrong. And in some of the more modern systems, bringing in additional data that wasn't normally part of an MDM solution, because of technology and because of, I think just, machines are able to better process data, to bring in things like transactions and interactions, not in your master data system per se, but in your data ecosystem. That is when you link these things to the anchor points. The anchor points would be the master data, and you can get to your right-hand reasoning. So I like the way that Informatica is positioning. In this case, it's a 360 solution. And maybe just in passing, we just found within the projects that I've been working on, and with ST and so on, you mainly get two kinds of MDM projects or solutions. You get a 360 kind of approach, where you want to have a 360 view of a customer or a product or students or whatever. But the other way to do it is to do it organically. So you kind of follow the business requirements and you build MDM solutions along the way. Both are quite valid. So today we're focusing on a bit of a different story on MDM. We've spoken last week. We've also used Mediclinic. We've also used Mediclinic as a case study, but we looked at party modeling and their doctor solution last week. Today, I want to talk about one of the other things we did for them. Now, just as by way of reminder, for those who've been here previously, the Mediclinic journey was an example of an organic approach to MDM. And I'm saying that because the very first thing we did was international procurement. We'll be diving into that a little bit deeper. And the next thing we did was something that's unrelated to the first thing. So this is true multi-domain MDM. Once we've looked at optimizing the procurement process with a master data solution, we went into financial MDM, where we did chart of accounts. Then we went into a party-based solution where we mastered the doctor's data and actually not only the doctor's data, but all the data about doctors and healthcare providers of all sorts. And there were some other things we did as well. And what I just want to sort of highlight at this point in time is with if you go for an organic approach, your journey might take you into areas where you can't quite foresee right now. In 2 years' time, things might have changed and your priorities might have changed, but your MDM solutioning would follow that trajectory, which is exactly what has happened here.
So, sorry, Paul, could I ask you a question?
Yes.
When you refer to organic approach, are you saying that you're almost following the business challenges or problems, and then moving from one to another, rather than, for example, choosing a subject area or an application, or what do you mean by organic?
Yeah. So, I mean, organic is just a word that we use internally. I don't think it's officially coined or whatnot. So don't go Google it. It's just the way that we refer to how we found a journey could look like. So organically is almost like an organically grown, like a plant, the different branches of it. You don't quite know where the next one's going to come from, and they take their own shape. And some of our projects here have showed similar traits. And so in this case, you could say this one actually played out nicely in terms of a domain-based approach. I would say it was products first, and then it was financial MDM, which I guess in a way could be reference data to a party-based approach. So in this case, it was taking different domains, but also very importantly, linking it specifically to a business problem that was needing to be solved. And I think if we think strategically about it, you might at the beginning of an MDM program think, okay, you'll deal with customer, and then you'll deal with perhaps supplier, and then perhaps with addresses. That's a kind of a domain approach. It's still multi-domain, but you're sort of building out your domains as you go along, and you plan for that. In this case, it literally followed what the business required at a certain point in time, planned for that, and then executed on that using the same platform. So
just as a question, how would you almost present that to the execs? You're almost trying to build a partnership here of as you progress and as you go along, you will help them resolve their master data issues. So you haven't really got this roadmap up front. I'm assuming this is looking back, and you're able to explain where you've come along. So if you're trying to encourage the business to take on something like this, how would you present that to them?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I know there's a few practitioners on the call as well. Happy if you chip in. The whole approach that we've taken here, and this is what organic is about, is I almost want to say the fact that we're doing MDM is almost incidental in a way. The main focus is actually solving business problems with the philosophies and the set of processes and solutions on that's underpinned by MDM. So from an executive point of view, again, if your approach is going to be organic, then almost all big problems that a business faces from a data perspective will involve master data management in some way or another. because as we've seen, the three main drivers would be optimization of your processes, analytics, or compliance. So maybe from an executive point of view, the message is MDM is really important, but it's not just important for its own sake. It's important for specific reasons, and those reasons could be linked back to business value directly. And maybe let me tell you what I mean by that. In this particular case, so the Chief Clinical Officer of MediClinic, he didn't have master data management questions. He had questions on, well, he wanted to be more knowledgeable around international analytics. And he wanted to improve his decision making, using data. All these things are fairly generic. He couldn't because the data was siloed. There was no real BI. As you might know, MediClinic operates in 4 geographical spaces. And importantly for this project, there was no classification standard, so they had no idea how to compare apples to apples. So what do I mean by that? So if you look at the same item here, syringes in this case, depending on where you are in the world, there would be barrier-ridden systems with different product codes. And even if you've got the same vendor, let's say Johnson & Johnson, that you buy these from, they would also often keep things in separate countries. They would use separate codes for that. So the classification standard was a real problem. And now we're going a little bit into detail here. And I know maybe the executive sort of level doesn't really care about that. But unless this sort of under the hood work is being done, oh yeah, by the way, these guys also had different languages, so you can't match. You can't, if you're a hospital group operating in South Africa and you buy a box of syringes here and you want to see how the data compares, you can't use language or descriptions because it's in different languages. So before I go there, so this is important because unless you have a classification system where you know that, okay, what I'm looking at here is a Granny Smith apple, and it's in South Africa, and I'm in Switzerland. There's also a Granny Smith apple. Before you know that, you can't compare it. Your analytics will be wrong, and in this case, they couldn't go back to their suppliers and negotiate on price. And in fact, when they were able to do this, they had a huge saving. The 5 million a year was just based on 3 items that they were piloting this whole thing with. It was syringes, it was surgical gloves, and I think it was suture kits. And just looking at the data, this was even before the whole solution was implemented. This was just actually getting to a place where we could compare. That was a saving, and if over time that was expanded to the other products as well, and it was a very big saving across all products. And so once they did that, they could not only go back for price negotiations, but sometimes skip the supplier and go to the manufacturer of the products. When we talk products here, we mean anything that a hospital buys from somebody to operate. Whatever that is, consumables, even on the medicine side, syringes and those things, of course, bedding, anything like that. All right, so this was a good story because MDM clearly has a financial benefit. The big thing we're trying to emphasize here is we've done a product-based MDM solution, but we don't want to say that necessarily. We want to say we've optimized or helped international procurement, and that's the point, especially in an organic approach. Follow the business, make sure that what you implement is actually tied to a business case. That's always important, but try to not even call it MDM unless you're a technical team and sitting around a table or around a Zoom call. All right, any questions on that? I know I've told some parts of that story already, so it should be fairly familiar. And just to re-emphasize what we said earlier about the waiter story as well. Master data is about 3 things only. It's about people, places, and things. People like customers, patients, employees, waiters, and vendors. places. In the case of Mediclinic, hospital locations and addresses were important. And then all kinds of things. Insured items, chart of accounts, products, and they're the nouns in any sentence. They're the subjects of any insights and analytics. And when we talk about master data management, the management thereof is really about three things. It's about getting it from various places, curating it, to just use a high-level generic word. In other words, getting it together, making sure that that you know where it comes from, that you know which parts of the data you trust from where, and then just share it and use it within your organization, whether that's in reporting, whether that's in compliance audit, or just optimizing your processes, because the master data is the same and curated and being accessed from all the places. So, and just one last story before we chat a little bit more about just discussion. We were asked to do I was asked to do a presentation on data quality at the Reserve Bank at some point. It's another of those things that Howard got me into. And he also didn't tell me, Howard, I don't know if you remember, but you forgot to tell me how important it is to wear a suit or at least a tie in that place. I wasn't aware. It was the first time I got there. And I came there in my jersey, and I was even trying to look for a tie to borrow. I mean, if you go into the Reserve Bank, you have to wear a tie. It's just how it is.
Even on Friday.
Yeah, so I went there without one. And
So I had one in my bag for you.
But why don't you give it to me? I don't know. I can't remember. Anyway, so I did the preparation on the data quality and on the presentation, and I remembered a few years prior to that, the company I was working for, Zeta, we were asked to do an MDM assessment for a large investment bank in South Africa, and we found that they had no single view of their local and global customers. They operated here and overseas. And when we brought this up with them, they said, well, it's by design. They didn't want to do, they didn't want to have a single view, and they had their reasons at the time. We did recommend that they look into MDM a bit more. But they didn't, and that was fine. When I did the preparation for the SARB, the Reserve Bank presentation, I just noticed while I was doing the prep, I went onto the Reserve Bank website, and there were some notices there, and I noticed that they fined this company 20 million rand because they didn't have their customer master data in order. I just want to say for the record that the price that we charged them for that readiness assessment was way less than that. Okay, and so, but they didn't, and it was a few years ago. So I think people have sort of changed their thinking, and I don't think people will still say that today. The sad thing about that is it's not only about avoiding fines with within the current climate of compliance and so on. Especially around privacy, but it's also a missed opportunity from a customer experience point of view. Somebody's arriving home and now my dog's bark. So I think they could have had better customer experience. In fact, the person that was on our team at the time, at Zeta, she was a customer of this bank, and she immigrated to Australia, came back, and so she actually went firsthand through this process of staying with the same bank, but needing to almost reapply. There was no smooth process there, and so that was quite interesting to have her on the team, and she could relay firsthand what it did to us from a customer experience point of view. Yeah, so I just wanted to bring that up. These days, you can't really ignore things like customer data and customer master data, especially. You're going to be asked to look at that from a compliance point of view, privacy, but it's not only punitive. There's also a lot of just positive aspects about MDM that you can apply. Better customer experience, certainly, better analytical insights, and don't do ignorance by design. If you do it because of other reasons, maybe there's an excuse, but ignorance by design is not a good thing. All right, I just thought I'd relay that story as well, and just just some questions and answers. So let's use the rest of the time to hear. I know there's some other practitioners. What's your experience in going the MDM route? Can you guys also share some benefits or difficulties that you experienced? And MDM is notoriously difficult to talk about, especially on the exec level, because it's really a lot of that is what's happening under the hood. It's about how the engine works and so forth. It doesn't in itself is tied. It's not often itself tied to the more sexy things, the improved analytics and so on. It's something that needs to be done to get there. Any questions or comments on that?
Yeah, Bryn, yeah, Paul, how's it?
Hey, Bryn.
Good, man. Yeah, so in terms of your organic kind of evolution, absolutely makes a lot of sense, no question about it. What we found, however, though, is that master data management it's a complex undertaking. There's no question, no matter how you look at it. There are so many, facets to it.
Yeah.
In choosing what area of the business, or specifically what data domain, let's call it, there's also the practicality issue. So what's practical to do? It's all well and good in saying, well, here's the high business value, let's say customer, and we're going to get most value out of that for all the obvious reasons. But something like customer is, in any large organization, is a massive thing in its own right. And particularly if you take that up to the party level, where you're talking about maybe suppliers and employees and things as well. So advice really is to cut your teeth on something small, something practical, which will deliver value, perhaps not as much value as one of the bigger domains, but nevertheless cutting your teeth from all the people, process, technology issues, going through the whole MDM process end to end, find an area of the business with an associated data element, which is practical to actually cut your teeth on and make the mistakes, because they will happen, no question about it, in that first project. So the issue of just being choosing something practical, I think, is very, very important as well, as a stepping point, as a stepping stone, or a starting point, I should say.
Yeah, I agree 100%. That's so important. You're right, because people, I mean, I can think of literally every one of the projects that I've been involved in. There's been an expectation that MDM would, people think that they have good quality data, or they've got a fairly good idea about their master data, and as soon as you actually get into it, people realize they don't. But it's often that you want to bite off too much you can chew, and it's difficult to argue against it, especially if it's a new customer. You don't want to. You obviously want to find a balance where you deliver value, but are not just blocking progress. But what you're saying is really important.
A lot does depend on maturity. So an organization that understands what MDM is all about and the complexities thereof will go the route I've suggested in terms of finding something practical. The temptation, however, to go the big bang kind of approach is there. And the other thing I wanted to say as well, and you might have covered this in some of your other sessions, sorry I missed, but we've just seen a few times now going straight to the technology and putting the technology in and thinking that's going to sort it all out. There's a lot more to it than just the technology. There's no question, but I'm pretty sure you probably covered that in some of your other sessions.
Yeah, but very important to bring it up again. In fact, I might have mentioned that in the previous one, but it's worth repeating here. Everybody knows there's a few things that you have to get in place when you do MDM, right? And executive backing is absolutely one crucial element of it. And in this one project we had all the right things in place. We had strong executive support. We didn't even have to set. In fact, the CIO, he initiated everything and started the program. It was not that that anybody pitched for it necessarily. So we had a strong backing. Everybody knew it was a good idea. Nobody could fault the reasoning behind it. So everybody was quite enthusiastic. But there were two things that were problematic. One, data management maturity was low, as you mentioned, and two, even though everybody thought it was a good idea, it was still difficult to actually link it to fixing a problem, a business problem. By doing that, everybody understood that in time it would fix a lot of things, but there wasn't enough articulation right up front to actually make a difference and go the right route. So it struggled for quite a while before it took off because of that. So just I agree with what you're saying there. You've got an up hand.
Gary, that's Gary.
Hey, Gary.
Yeah, how's it, guys? So, I mean, I'm kind of in agreement, well, I am in agreement with both what you and Brent have been saying, but the challenge that you find with MDM projects is there's quite a big investment required. So the challenge is to show the roadmap as well. So yes, you want to start with something, you know, as you said, Paul, grow organically, show business value. But if people are going to spend, for the sake of argument, 2 million rand or 3 million rand on a platform and another 2 or 3 million rand on services, it's also difficult for business to buy into that when the only problem they're trying to solve is to get, for the sake of argument, charter of account sorted out. So that's the balancing act, is to find a problem that's big enough to justify what tends to be an enterprise spend and is reusable, but to do it in a way that's small enough to be delivered successfully. I just think it's worth. I'm kind of curious to know what your experience is solving that problem.
Yeah, quite right, Gary. I mean, you're absolutely spot on. That actually presents two problems. On the one hand, MDM software and the whole project is not going to be cheap, right? I mean, it does require longer term investment. I also don't want to just scare people away that, you know, it's cheap, so it's expensive, so we can't do it. But because it takes investment from both a people and a change management and a technology perspective, there's obviously an amount attached to it that will attract attention. Now, because of that, there's a lot of eyes on this thing, and there's also a lot of pressure to deliver quickly, and that's what makes MDM projects pretty difficult if you don't manage it well, because the deployment team would be under pressure to deliver something because of the expectations and the price tag, and that means that the team might be forced to take shortcuts, or you know, if the business is not quite on board and not involved in everything in the thinking process, then it slows things down. And so there's a big unhealthy pressure that happens. So the roadmap, as you say, is quite important, even in an organic way. So what we just found is each step in the organic process is in itself quite forward-looking, and in itself needs to make sure that it carries itself over to the you know, before you get to the next point, and it pays for itself. What we often use in the Ultron projects is something called Articulate, which is roughly built on the 7 building blocks of Gartner, but we try to use that to actually talk through all the aspects that you need to get a bit of a longer term view. I'm sure it's the same kind of thing that you guys also do. It's, you know, it's discovery process, and you just need to make sure you have all the conversations that you need to before you jump in and design and implement. But it's in that space where we also look at not only what we're fixing now, but what we want to put down for future as well. I'm sure you've actually also developed something similar, Gary, and Bren especially also as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but it's still that is the challenge, is to get past the mindset that this is an integration project, and then to recognize that it's an investment in multiple use cases in the business, but you need to start with one. That's always, I think, the challenge.
Yeah, I agreed with that. Another approach, and we've used this, is if you are going to be choosing let's call it a high value kind of domain, what we've done is we do what we call a thin slice, but end to end. So in other words, you choose a subset of sources, a subset of entities, subset of attributes, rules around from data quality perspective, just to put the whole thing together and make sure it all works. You know, obviously you need to choose something which is going to show some value, but instead of the big bang where you take in all sources, all attributes, etc., all rules around data quality, do that thin slice end to end, and we've done this, and it does work very well, and then build out from there.
Right.
as organically.
Yes. Yeah.
Paul, last week, I
Yeah.
think you mentioned something that was very, really stuck out for me was when you said, call it something different. And,
Yeah.
Looking at a business problem, naming the problem, and then attacking, using the problem, that naming convention as the name for the business case rather than the technical term, which can throw execs off a little bit because of the stigma
Right.
maybe of the price and all that. But that, for me, that stuck out last week. Just wanted to mention that again.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, we find that helps, and I mean, I think at Mediclinic especially, we kind of I mentioned the doctor's list, but that's the word that they use internally. They talk about it like that. But yeah, if you say we're going to implement an MDM project, when you use those terms and you're going to use it in a business, I just agree with Bryn. You'll have to be in a certain state of maturity to be able to do that. But even so, it's always good to just call it something else if you can. What we also talked about is the kind of different approaches here, and there's maybe some of these you can actually sort of do together. But these are the main approaches to implement MDM. It's either subject by subject or domain by domain. So you do customer and then employee and then product and whatnot. Or you do it by maybe department or something like that, where there's units in the business that wants to tackle an MDM problem. Or a process, and this is, I think, what Bryn, was it you who said that? You take a thin slice of something. So the process-driven approach is often like that, because you basically choose a process, and like in an employee onboarding process, there's actually quite a lot of traditional MDM domains that you're touching, but you ignore, for example, HR and employee data. But in this case, you kind of deal with only those things that are necessary for onboarding and not for other things necessarily. And the fourth one is system-based, which, and again, I find this especially in the older institutions, especially on the financial side, companies has been running for a long time. There's a very strong tie between how the business people think and speak and their systems. So I often say this, but you speak to people who's been working on mainframe for a while, and even the business people use mainframe codes instead of business language, And then there's project as well, which is not, I mean, I would say neither of these are desirable to be in, but it's often where you have to start, and to kind of get to one of the other ones is better. And we've often found that you can do some of these things together. So, for example, you deal with customer data only in the sales department, and so then you have a kind of a matrixed approach. And really, all of these things is just to make, not to try to boil the ocean, to use a cliche thing, but just to kind of narrow it down to find the sweet spot of what can we actually deal with, and why do we deal with it, and what kind of things can we solve when we go with this particular approach. And that's how these are ways to narrow things down and spec it out. And I'm wondering, Brennan and Gary, out of these 5, which ones of these are you finding people want to do the most?
Sorry, Paul.
Yes.
There's some other questions there. By Haj, do you want to see if you can talk to that? And Esti's also got one. So do you want me to read them to you?
Yes, please. That'll help. I am looking at them now as well, but maybe you can point them out.
All right. So the first one was by Esti. And how would we approach it? How would we approach implementing MDM at a small company, especially considering the investment, or should a company reach a certain size before it becomes viable? And should they maintain data models in the meantime?
Okay, that's a good question, because everybody, no matter how small, is already doing MDM. you might just be doing it in spreadsheets, but if you have a business, you deal with your customer data, you deal with the services data that you offer or the products that you sell. So everybody does MDM already. Whether you do it well is the question, and whether to go more formal and whether to buy technology is sort of tied to that, right? So, and I mean, I guess all I can say there is there has to be a good business case for why and how you're going to implement something more formal. But just being aware of the concepts of MDM and making sure that you find ways, even if we talk about Excel's deduplication method. I mean, I'm really talking about small business now, but often that's you've got pretty big businesses running an Excel still, right? So regardless of the technology, you have to think about the concepts behind MDM. The main concept is identity resolution. You want to make sure you don't have duplicates when you talk about your customers and what they buy from you and knowing things about that and so on. But obviously, sort of if your company is bigger, and we're talking about corporates now, there are many corporates that's not yet running a formal MDM program. But by and large, they're doing MDM in some way or form. They have ways, you know, to know their customer and what they sell to them and customer sentiment even and so on. Again, it's about how well you actually do that and how effective is the current solution that you have. I'm hoping that makes sense.
To add to that, Paul, so maybe being a little bit controversial, but you know, if you take MDM or part of the main sort of definition of MDM being a very specific data architecture based on quite specific technology, then in theory, if you get two other components right, being data quality management and data governance, and those are big terms which we could obviously unpack, but in theory, if you're getting those right, you actually don't need an MDM hub, an MDM data architecture. Very much theoretical, because obviously with that MDM hub in place, it also makes the other two, it helps the other two as well. I've got a nice slide I often use, which is the matrix in terms of how each of those three areas support one another. So the answer around, you know, if you're a small company, is that, you know, first have a look at getting your data quality management under control, or your data quality under control, and everything around data governance, and even if it's not a lightweight approach, just in terms of data stewardship, those kinds of things, and ensuring that, you know, your data processes are building quality assurance, and that you're not being reactive. So that's a possibility. I mean, the second point to the small company question is use what you've got, or try and use what you've got at least, you know, without having to go out there and put in extensive technology once again to cut your teeth. So yeah, I mean, what we found is even Microsoft, for example, with MDS can be a good starting point. It's not exactly what we would call MDM technology, but it certainly can help as a starting point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to go on that is what I found, Esti, is when you bring in the BI and you start building those dimensions, you pick up and you can visualize to the business exactly where the bad master data is. So you'll see duplicate customers or incorrect product names and stuff like that. And those dimensions, what I have done a few times is actually build fact tables on top of a dimension to be able to explain the state of the customer dimension or the address dimension or whichever area that is causing problems, so that it gives you some level of visibility whilst building what most of them want initially is a BI system. And then one can start manually, once they can see the challenges and see the grouping issues and things like that, then the value proposition and the requirement is better understood.
Yeah, I mean, Brent, I'm thinking of one of your customers at the moment who's, I mean, it's a very big organization in South Africa, and that's the approach that they followed, right? They concentrated first on data quality and data governance, and have not yet implemented MDM, and yet their data management practice and actually culture is pretty good. So yeah, it is about what makes, where you are in a business and what makes sense and what you can do, maturity, but also just I want to say aptitude. That's the wrong word. Desire, taste. What's the word I'm looking for? Just the energy
Appetite.
people are.
The appetite.
Thank you. Thank you, Esther. And I see here somebody said from MTM. Oh, he just left, so I'm going to speak to him after he's left.
It's Dino, yeah.
It hasn't left, so it gets too complex and costly. That's a very good comment, because it is quite true, especially in the large organizations. It is not, you can't think about it simplistically. But I want to say to that I think it's not MDM that's too complex and costly. It's about the inability, whether it's because of time or oversubscription of people too busy or whatever. There's a whole host of reasons. But it's a lack of clarity around how the business itself functions across its departments and units. That's the issue, not the MDM. MDM is simple. Look, MDM is relatively simple, or is as simple as it depends on how clear you are in terms of your business, how it operates, how it links, how it thinks about itself, how it's laid out, and how well you could model that and play that back and describe that. If those things are clear, then MDM is relatively simple. That's what I mean. It's not the MDM that's complex. It's the business that's complex. And with enough thinking and reasoning, you can sort of get to a point where it's nicely modeled out and explained and understood. But especially in big organizations, it's very fast-paced. Things change so quickly. It's not trivial to get that right.
Sorry, Paul. There's another question from Renaud Pillay. She's asking, please elaborate on data subsets for data quality. I'm not sure where that was mentioned. Do you remember that?
Bren, was that something you mentioned?
I don't know. I don't quite understand the question.
So subsets could be
data subsets.
So for me, my understanding is sometimes you sample the data in data quality, and you look at your quality on a sample, and then before you start profiling, you can choose how to sample the data so that you can get an understanding of the data quality. Rena, is that the question you're asking?
Howard, yeah, I just joined in late, and then I think it was Gary that mentioned something about the data subsets and.
Okay. Gary?
At that point in time, so I just wanted to know more about it because.
Okay, fine. I understand. Gary, is there?
Sorry, I struggled to hear Rena. What did you?
Okay, so Gary, the question is, she felt that you may have mentioned something called data subsets for data quality, and she just wanted to understand what you were talking about, or if maybe it sounded something like that.
I'm not sure is the honest answer, but I mean, if I'm trying to answer the question from a master data management perspective, so I want to echo what Bryn was. I kind of had my hand up to say pretty much what Bryn said, is that I say on my website, if you go and look at our page, is that master data management is about the technology and the processes and the governance to manage master data. So it's not about technology. So if you're looking at data from a subset, you can say, well, I want to look at my customer data quality and I can build a customer data master set without building full-blown customer master MDM. And that might be in my CRM, for example, or on top of my ERP. So, a lot of times what we're talking about around a customer master, or as a simple example, customer master, it's getting that one record or one key, unique key that relates all of my customer master records, potentially with them sitting inside my billing engine or inside my CRM, but then linking that to other systems that use customer. So if you're talking about data sets, I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question correctly. It would be looking at a domain or looking at a business problem and then saying, how do I solve that business problem, right?
Yeah.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks.
And Reno, Paul also mentioned almost data subject areas. So That's also the sort of grouping of the data within your environment, and then tackling it at a smaller level rather than at big, let's do everything level.
Okay. Thanks, Howard.
There was another question, I think it was from Haj, sorry. Haj said, we used MDM concept to perform entity resolution on a solo application environment. And it was helpful as a data quality tool. The best use of MDM when we had more than application or beneficiary user for data. Haj, is that?
I just want to talk briefly to the cost question that Danaya asked, because I think that the big challenge I see where cost gets out of hand is where you're not doing what Paul was saying, or focusing on a specific business problem. So very often what we see is we get called into RFPs, for example, where it's been driven by IT and they're looking for a platform, but there's no real clear understanding of why they're doing it. And that's when costs can get out of control. Whereas if you're saying, as Paul demonstrated with MediClinic, well, we can do a 5 million rand saving on 3 product items, like, in our procurement supply chain. There's an investment of 5 million rand for the sake of argument. That proof of concept is going to pay for the project, and after that, the next 95 million rand is for profit. So I just think it's a way that we position MDM. It tends to be driven by IT way too often with not enough business inputs, and that's when you lack of focus. It's an integration project. And that gets really complicated, really expensive, but it doesn't deliver clear value.
And I think we a lot of times we come back to the appropriate data governance, and the data governance should be setting the business value and the reason for whichever initiative you're dealing with. And sometimes we're not clear at getting that clear. We as technicians, we can see the reason for it, and we can try to, and we go ahead and we say we've got to have it, but we haven't spent time creating the right context and justification for the business. And that's, I suppose, what we're trying to say as part of this meeting in terms of our communication to execs cannot be predominantly technology based, or it's got to be, what are the challenges that you're facing? What are the problems they're causing with decision making, as Paul was talking about, and how can we address it in a minimal viable product type of approach where we understand what can we get working quickly and without high risk. I think well done, Paul.
Thanks everybody then for chipping in, especially Brennan and Gary. Thanks especially to you guys. You've been also in this game for quite a while, done a lot of good work. And valuable insights.
Sorry, before you close, one more question from Cornelia. How do you calculate business value when MDM investment competes with machinery capital expenditure?
I wonder what industry is.
Okay, so I've got an example there, Paul. I don't want to talk about the customer, but they had machinery that was exceptionally expensive, but that they weren't able to track. So I mean, a mining industry. I don't want to talk about the customer. They've got engineering pumps and what have you. These things are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars lying around rusting in fields because they don't know where they are. So the point of master data is that if you're competing with the material spend, then the question is, how does your master data management help you reduce your material spend? How does it help to make it more efficient? So you need to look at your business case in terms of what your business problem is. It may not be customer depending on the industry.
Yeah, that's very true, Gary. It's all about, and I think there were two aspects to it. To say, you're trying to justify MDM, but the business has got other big expenses on the side. And when the CEO looks at it, you're saying, which decision do I make? And from their point of view, it is pretty simple until you can show almost what we refer to as how the brakes can make you go faster. And certainly the thinking there is to say, yeah, you can do that, but if we're not being optimal in our current use of assets, and we're losing money and we're not using that asset effectively, like you're pointing out, Gary, then we should rather get that working And I think Paul's about to show some of a previous presentation we had.
Yeah, I mean, if the context is mining, then then there's a lot to be said about they deal with so many vendors that provides them all kinds of things. Now, if your vendor management, which is a master data problem, and your product management, which is also one, if those things are not looked after, it could very quickly escalate into a lot of inefficiencies and and just there's a lot of saving around this. This is one of our use cases where we did some work for Anglo, where they bought a mine and they needed to sort out the fact that they had now 2 mines with 2 sets of vendors and 2 sets of products, and there was a lot of wastage in not having control of that. So maybe Cornelia, maybe it's worth having more chats about it. But it's as Howard has also said, if we can't bring it back to clearly showing, look, from a value perspective, you're going to show value in one of those 3 ways. That's also the drivers. Sometimes you just have to do it because you need to be compliant, not necessarily doing full master data management solution just for that, but that's going to be a driver. But other than that, your value is going to be tied to process efficiencies or analytics, and you have to go through a process. It's not trivial to quantify the value. That's when we try to articulate. One of the things we do up front is to find words in English. In other words, non-technical terms, how we can describe what we're trying to do and where the benefits will come from. And that's so important to get right on an appropriate level. So both from an exec point of view or from a managerial point of view, you have to be able to link what you're going to do back to how it's going to benefit the business, and hence try to call it something else, because then you're on the right track.
And I think, Paul, that even the word analytics is too technical. It's about the business making effective, performing effective decision making to get the best out of what they're doing and to be the most efficient. And if the data is not giving them that level of clarity, then that's where they have to start. As you say, the number of assets, the amount of information that's out there, and if that's a mess, then how do the guys make decisions on running this at an optimal level? Cornelia, I don't know if that answers your question.
Howard, yes, to a certain extent it does.
Where did we miss it?
Look, I think for me, one of the challenges is calculating return on investment on MDA versus when you purchase machinery or upgrade machinery that is archaic in the business.
Yeah.
So how does one calculate ROI on MDM?
So what I've been doing is to start with understanding what the problems are, and then constantly measuring the effect of the solution, right? So and there's always this thing of leading and lagging indicators, but you have to be able to say, this decision making is costing me so much, right? And it's based on bad, that's the bad or ineffective decision making. With the implementation of MDM, what has that improvement been, to be able to look at the ROI? And that's where one has to start, is to get to what is affecting the business and how master data is having that impact on it.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, there's no easy answer. You have to link it back to something that makes sense from a business point of view.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's and that requires. That's interesting, because similar to what Dineo says, and Dineo, I just want to confirm. I mean, I'm doing work for a telco right now. I know it's complex. I've been a permanent employee for a telco before. It's not a trivial process, but the tying back to business value also relates to how well the problem can be articulated, how well it's understood, and can you link the problem that you're experiencing in business the one you're trying to fix, can you link that appropriately to, and this is where I think Bryn will agree. Can you link it directly to a data quality issue? So because it's difficult to go from business problem to MDM. There's a step in between, kind of, or one step, and one of those things are dealing with the data, being able to actually pinpoint what the data quality issue is. Once you have that, then you can determine whether MDM is going to be appropriate or maybe something else. But it's sort of in that, data quality is such an important thing, or governance even, but data quality is almost easier to get to. It is a more direct link.
Yeah, Paul, there is that root cause analysis and being able to clearly demonstrate the root cause of it. And I think it's helpful for all of us to know that when we've identified the root cause and business is in agreement with it, then our building and fixing that is a lot more measurable, and your ROIs are better calculated.
You're dead right about that data quality step. So in the MDM programs we've done, we start with that very much. And one of the first things we try and do is build some reports and dashboards around data quality and how that's improving depending on what the interventions are. And people understand that and recognize it because it's pictures and they can see it. And even better if you can correlate that to business impact in terms of cost savings or whatever the case might be. But absolutely, you have to get to that point and you have to make that visual before you get to MDM. And even when MDM is in place, you need to keep doing that. So your data quality assessment and ongoing monitoring needs to become part of the whole process, even if you got MDM in place. No question. It's one of the ways of proving value.
And isn't that applicable to every single area of data management?
Absolutely.
So it's the consistent message that if you're doing stuff for IT sake, or you're doing stuff and you don't clearly understand the impact or the outcome that you're trying to achieve, you're going to be looking back and you say, well, what have you been doing for the last 5 years and why is it costing so much?
And even if you have good stories to tell, that question still comes up. You get a new CIO, or you get new kind of change of thinking in management. I'm like, okay, guys, it's pretty clear. There's been a lot of good, done, but you still need to be able to, at any point in time, kind of comfortably show what that value was. And bring it fresh. So. What does Dineo say?
Dineo is saying that less tech speak, and I suppose I keep on sharing this example of how we get it wrong sometimes. Is if an exec comes and they want to fix a hole in the wall, it doesn't help trying to explain the plumbing and the electricians and all the different areas that are going to help him fix the problem. It's just fix my problem and tell me what it's going to cost. And make it go away, So sometimes we want them to know about all the different data management knowledge areas where they're actually not interested.
Yeah, they almost never are.
How can anybody not be interested?
Like I should say to you as well, like I sometimes say to Hart, people like ST people are not like you, all right? So. Not everybody is a industrial engineer at heart.
Thanks, guys. I think I'd also just like to thank Gary and Bryn from Info Blueprint and Gary from Master Data Management. So certainly you can look them up, find them on their website. They do a fantastic job in the community. So we've worked well with them. So guys, these guys have got many years of experience and they can certainly help you on this journey.
Yes. And hopefully they'll also do some presentations soon. So that'll be great.
Gary's volunteered.
Oh, great. Fantastic.
Yeah, truthfully, I didn't even know about the series on MDM, which I find quite ironic because that's my company's name, but I only saw this last one yesterday, so here I am.
Oh, fantastic. Excellent.
Gary, did you volunteer or was it that kind of volunteering that Howard
No, he,
sort of funny.
no, he volunteered. He came at me on WhatsApp and said, I've got this demonstration on Lineage that I want to show you your community. So we said, fantastic.
Oh, great. That'll be great to see. Nice. Okay, guys, thanks so much for everybody who has attended and contributed, and hope you found it valuable. And the next time we speak is when, Howard?
Oh, it's the first Thursday of May. So Debbie would know.
Yes, and that's going to be a different
May.
topic. So May is what topic?
May is we're doing data literacy and data management career assessments, assessments. So using data literacy and using assessments to build a path and help you grow.
Nice.
Right. Cool.
All right, thanks.
All right,
everyone.
everybody. Hope to see you soon. And then thanks a lot for attending.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Cool.
Appreciate your
everyone.
time. Thanks.
Well,
Thanks.
thanks. Bye.
Bye.